Welcome to It Dawns on Me. I'm Dawn Kirk, and I am here today with our next episode of our podcast. And today we get to talk to Representative Cathy Kipp, and I'm really excited that she is here to join us. I know she's incredibly busy right now with everything going on, and so I'm excited to hear more about it. And so I'm going to get out of the way and just leave it to you for a second to tell us what's interesting to you and what you wish people knew and how we can get involved.
Oh, okay. I'm Cathy Kipp. This is my sixth year in the state legislature. So I serve in the state house right now, running for the state senate. So that might be where I am next year. We'll see how the election goes. Um, so I served for 7 years on our local school board before joining the state legislature, and I joined because we have to fund our schools properly, right? And actually, that's something that well, while we've made a lot of progress, we're continuing to work on. So this is the year that we have finally decided that we can pay off what we call the negative factor, the budget stabilization factor, also known as the BS factor. That's so that's basically the amount of money that our voters said that we should get school funding back to in 2020. When 2008 happened and the Great Recession happened, they found a loophole. So they said, well, we don't actually have to fund that much, but that really wasn't great. And the education community kept on saying, we need to get back to where we said we'd be. Now, where we said we'd be was 1989 levels, 1989 equivalent levels of school funding, so adjusted for inflation. So one of the things we put into last year's School Finance Act, which I'm very, very happy about, is the fact that we're doing something called an adequacy study. And we're actually doing two of them. And we're doing adequacy studies to say, how much does it actually cost to educate a kid in Colorado, right, in our public schools? And then that way we can move the goalpost and figure out, well, okay, this year we're getting back to 1989 levels of school funding. Is it adequate? I'm guessing probably not, but we'll wait for those studies to see, and then we can hopefully move the goalpost. Other things I work on I'm chair of the Energy and Environment Committee, so I've been doing a lot of work in that space as well. I do have run bills every year in the space of, trying to reduce emissions and I've done a lot in the energy efficiency world, which is probably like the non-sexy part of doing like energy environment policy. But while I've been there, we've also passed the nice thing about being in the legislature is you get to vote on everybody's bills, not just your own. So, so there's been a lot of policy that we passed. We've set a lot of goals on achieving, um, you know, getting to zero carbon emissions, et cetera, over time. And we're in the middle of that. Also, we have terrible, terrible air quality here in the Front Range. And you don't maybe really notice it because you're here every day and it builds up over time. But our Larimer County, Fort Collins community, we have the 15th worst air quality in the entire nation, according to the American Lung Association. So that's problematic. Those are things I work on. My most interesting bill this year is I call it my mind reading bill, my neural rights bill, which I know sounds very, sci-fi and out there, but it is, there's actually a lot of devices that you can buy over the counter that basically are capturing your brain waves. And most of those companies that are capturing them are reselling those brain waves. And the problem that we have there is that you have the technology for actually reading your thoughts, and I know that sounds really crazy, has improved a lot over the years, and it's really done amazing things for people in our disability community. It's improved their mobility, it's improved their communication. If you think of one of the somebody who's a paraplegic who gets into one of those suits and is able to walk a bit, those are often operated by implants in your brains. But now there's these wearable devices, so they're wearable, they're not covered by HIPAA because they're not surgically implanted. And um, they're getting better at reading your thoughts. There was actually a skull cap that they've come out with, not as commercial, but that's what they're testing right now in Australia. It's a tight-fitting skull cap, and if you wear it, it has actually, get this, 40% accuracy on thought to text recognition. So the technology is really getting out there. There was a really interesting story in the New York Times back in August that talked about how scientists were able to recreate the Another Brick in the Wall song by Pink Floyd just by reading people's brainwaves. So it is really a thing. It's not just like this crazy thing that's out there. So we're just adding some protections this year with to privacy of thought, privacy of biological data. I've worked with the AG's office, has been working with it, the Attorney General's office. We worked on legislation on consumer protection with them a couple of years ago. So they're a great office to work with. Really appreciate their partnership and working on these types of consumer protections. Done a couple of things in the public health space, and honestly, it was very strange to me that while we've moved the ball forward, that even trying to increase or decrease the politicization of public health during a pandemic was nearly impossible. So there's, we have a lot of things that we're working on. We also, at the state level, we do work on things that you might hear about at the national level, right? In Colorado, we've done a lot to make sure that we're ensuring people have right to reproductive health, right to abortion, right to, uh, hopefully feel as safe as we can. We've passed a number of gun violence prevention measures while I've been there, trying to protect our LGBTQ community, especially with all the attacks on trans people. Right now, it's really offensive. We need to really protect especially our young people, everybody, but especially our youth in that community because they're some of the most vulnerable. We've made huge strides in mental health. We now have the I Matter program, which continues to be renewed, which gives every young person, I think it's right now 6 free telehealth sessions should they need that mental health help and at least get them started down the track. So, and let's not forget housing, because housing is one of the biggest issues that we have out there.
Yeah.
We are 100,000 units short in Colorado of having adequate housing units for people. What happened is in the Great Recession back in 2008, right? The
Yeah.
housing units dropped off and the population kept growing. And so then the disparity between how many housing units we need and our population got wider and wider. So those are a lot of the important issues, but feel free to ask me about anything else that you might care about.
Well, you just said a whole bunch of things I care about. I mean, you started with one that was near and dear to my heart. I've been so grateful for all the ways that we've been able to chip away at school funding and to know that we're doing an adequacy study, easy for me to say, is important, right? I mean, because I do think that those of us who are paying attention to this, who have some connection to schools, whether it's as a parent or teachers or anything like that, I mean, the math just is kind of obvious to us, right? I mean, I've often said I was in the last fully funded class that have that we've had in our district. And so to think about the fact that I had my kids late and my kids are still not with a fully funded education, and we're hoping to get back to that level, seems really obvious to us, but I do really appreciate that we would have great data to talk about that instead of, what we know to be true and the anecdotes and the personal connections that we see with the way that we've funded this. And so I celebrated a lot last year with all of the work that was done to actually also add in funding specifically for the groups that were most often impacted by the negative factor or the BS factor, because, we've also struggled as a nation and as a state with fully funding special education and early childhood and things that we know are some of the most impactful things that we can invest in. We have struggled with how do we do it. And the way that funding works in Colorado for taxes, for legislature, for schools is absolutely fascinating. And with so many people moving in, um, there's all these wonderful conversations I hear about people going, I didn't realize it was like that. Why don't we just do this? They're used to what they have from wherever they just came from, and ours is really complicated. So I'm grateful that you keep your eye
So
on all that.
Tabor is huge, right? I mean, we are giving money, tax money that we really need to support some of our vital services back to people, which I know they like those checks, but while we're giving money back, we're also have been underfunding a lot of really vital services like education. One of the things that I should mention is that some of the work I've done over the past 6 years has been on the teacher pipeline, right? We had a teacher shortage before the pandemic. Our teacher shortage today is even worse. So, I mean, I have a bill that put a number of ARPA dollars towards, right, trying to make sure that teachers during that residency period, when they're doing that student teaching, which they have to do for free,
Mm,
that students who had some financial need were able to get some dollars just to help them, like, get through that period of time, while they're, not exorbitant pay or anything, but just a stipend to help them make ends meet while they were doing that. And that's been an incredibly successful program. I have a bill this year where we're hoping to continue some of the money funding, but, even though when you look at the amount above the Tabor cap, which we have to basically give back to people, we're not going to be able to fully keep that program fully funded. And it's been incredibly successful. The other thing it's been successful at doing is getting more diversity of teachers into the school system, because when you're taking people who have historically been more financially challenged and bringing them into the system, you're getting a much broader set of people into the system, and kids do better when they have people who look like them in the education system teaching them. And so I'm hoping that we can find at least some dollars to help that program continue some. I've also got a bill I'm working on this session with one of our new members on to expand a teacher mentorship program, because teacher mentorship programs help retain teachers at both ends of the spectrum, right? You are giving your more experienced teachers an endorsement and saying that they're going to qualify to mentor teachers, where you're giving them some training. You're also giving them a stipend to help mentor new teachers. And then those teachers at the other end of the spectrum are less likely to drop out at the beginning of their teaching career and say, oh my gosh, I just can't handle this, because they're getting that mentorship. So, we're just doing everything we can think of that we can afford to do to try and keep people in the teaching profession, because if we run out of public school teachers, it really won't matter how much money we have. We're already near the bottom in the country, in Colorado overall, and how we pay teachers. If we keep going down that path, we can train them and then maybe they'll leave, right? But
yeah.
at least we're trying to get more into the system and into the communities where we need teachers now.
Yeah. Well, so you bring that up, and that's one of those things that is absolutely worth celebrating, because we were 49th in school funding last year at the beginning of the legislative session, and we moved to 35th in the nation
Woohoo!
with the funding. Yeah. I mean, so like, what a big deal that is. That is such an amazing, tremendous change, right? Usually, if you want to do that, you, you can't. I mean, it's just a big undertaking, and it took a lot of those moving parts. I am nervous about the fact that we had all these federal dollars that came in, and many of them were temporary grant funded, and they funded some of these programs that were really impactful to the community, right? The ones that impacted the people who were probably struggling before the pandemic. Teachers is one example of that. Students, working families are all really impacted by these great grants that came out that focused on how do we support people. And it turns out that the pandemic wasn't the only reason that people needed it, right? Those things didn't go away when we went back to the office. And so I'm grateful that you've undertaken all of that challenge, because it's really, um, it is like a little nerve-wracking right now, trying to figure out what is it going to look like as we get to the end of this session and where will we end up? What will we be moving around um, or not have funding for? And a lot of
Well,
like mental health was in that.
yeah, and a lot of the dollars that we've had available the last few years, I mean, it's not even just that they were grants, it's just that those were federal pandemic dollars, all of those dollars that the federal government was able to make available to states. And every state used them in different ways. These are some of the ways that we use those dollars. And now we're like, well, yeah, we knew these dollars were going away. In my personal bill, we put, really robust reporting in hopes that we could get some continuation of the funding, because we said we need to show people that this is going to be a really effective strategy, so that if there are dollars available, hopefully we can continue some. But, when the dollars aren't there, you know, I
Yeah,
don't know exactly how this is going to look. And,
yeah,
and the budget is tight this year at the state level. Um, and so the ability to continue some of these really impactful things is reduced.
yeah, it is. And I think about the other thing that I think I see happening every day is that we live in Colorado where really great things are happening, right? I mean, it's a beautiful place to live. But you talk about the air quality and of like part of the reason that we don't realize it's so bad is because it's beautiful even on the worst days, right? Like, and we have these great towns. We have so many things that we can do. It's not just the natural beauty. It's also really an amazing state that has a lot going on. And I think that that is also part of why people are surprised by how some of this funding works because we're doing really the impossible with the money we have, frankly. I mean, I don't say that lightly. The fact that we've been able to keep all of this going and even still be such a vibrant economy with the challenges that exist in the legislature are fascinating. And I know that there's almost always some work on how could we do it differently. What is going on this year to look at some of that foundational stuff like state funding? Do you have anything that you know of that's happening?
What, in the world of education or elsewhere?
Uh, just all state level funding.
Well, yeah. So our joint budget committee is sort of they're the people who are the gatekeepers of the money at the state level. So in the House and the Senate, we each send 3 members, 2 members of the majority and 2 members of the minority. So right now we have um, 4 Democrats and 2 Republicans on the Joint Budget Committee. They have been meeting so the budget cycle kind of looks like this, that the governor's office does what they do, and then they have to submit a budget on November 1st to the legislature. Then that's sort of the starting point, right? Just because the governor wants it doesn't mean that we get that money. And then the JBC starts going through and talking to all of the departments and, saying, well, do we want to do this? Do we want to do that? Do we want to do the other thing? And then where we are right now is sort of late. There's also quarterly budget forecasts that basically tell us how much money we have. And then there's the office of the governor and there's the JBC staff who come in with their different forecasts. The JBC usually goes by the most conservative forecast. So they've been basing everything that they've been doing the last few months based on the December forecast. The March forecast will be coming up probably next week. And then the budget will be coming over to the House once we have an idea of what that March forecast looks like and we know how much money we have to spend. Then the budget will come to the House. We'll spend a week doing the budget there. Then it'll go over to the Senate. They'll spend a week on it. And then, so basically the way it works is that the Joint Budget Committee develops the proposed budget. Then it's like a Christmas tree. So you take the Christmas tree over to the house and we decorate it. People put amendments on it and stuff. And then they strip it clean after that and it goes over to the Senate. They might decorate it. If they choose some of the same decorations in the House and the Senate, they might stick. But basically, ultimately, after the budget goes to the House and the Senate, it goes back to a conference committee, and the conference committee is made up of the Joint Budget Committee, who made the budget in the first place. So they because they are in depth, they're doing this every day. They don't serve on other committees. They have a lot more depth and knowledge, a bigger picture of how everything is put together. We just know that with inflationary increases for things like education and buying down the budget stabilization factor, BS factor, negative factor, whatever you want to call it, we know, and then keep in mind that those become ongoing dollars and ongoing obligations, because then you have to meet that obligation plus inflation the following year. When we give all of our state employees a pay raise to try and keep up with inflation, which we've not been great at, but we're getting better at.
Yeah.
We try to, and we that's an ongoing obligation for those dollars, and then you're going to have to pay more later. So it's not, when you look at all of the obligations that you create in an existing year for a future year, you really end up with very few flexible dollars the following year. And we're at the point where we have very few flexible dollars. I mean, the best thing that we have to do, the most flexibility we have are things called tax credits, right? So you say, okay, well, we're going to, we use those to incentivize behavior for things we want. Like you might have a tax credit for people who donate to help homelessness, or for people who put up a certain kind of housing, or for people who there's one this year, to try and give a tax credit for teachers who, because they tend to buy a lot of supplies out of their own personal funds that never get reimbursed, right? So we put in a lot of things to like that, and then that money really does come out of that Tabor surplus that you might call it, right? The money over that Tabor cap. And I guess we don't even want to use the word surplus, frankly, because if you use the word surplus, people think it's extra money. This is
Right.
not extra money. These are your
Right.
tax dollars that were intended to go to fund the programs that we are unable to fully fund because we aren't allowed to keep those dollars, and we have to give them back to the people who paid the taxes in the first place. And I
Yeah.
mean, and frankly, it's an arbitrary number. It is not it's a number that doesn't work. It's based on a formula that doesn't work. So, I mean, ultimately, I hope that someday our state gets to the point where they're willing to repeal Tabor, because frankly, we need to, in order to make progress. We've had a number of other states, since Colorado adopted Tabor, try to run ballot measures to adopt it. If it was working well, one of those states might have taken it up, but none of them
Right.
has. It
Right.
does not work here. It ties the hands of your legislature, who, you elect us. If you don't like the work we're doing, don't vote for us again. Don't reelect us. But tying the hands of the legislature by saying, well, you don't get to keep the revenue that you already take in. That's not even talking about raising taxes.
Yeah.
It's a real challenge. We have financial constraints that other states don't. That's why the pandemic came along, and we didn't have something a lot of other states do called a rainy day fund. We have some reserves, but we don't have that rainy day fund. We aren't able to just put money away and say, oh, well, we have some extra this year, so we will save it up so that if we have something bad happen later, we have that money. And then people make short-sighted decisions like, there's probably more measures coming to the ballot to reduce your taxes this year. Well, that's great, except, nobody wants to pay taxes, except what are you not getting? What services are not going to be happening in your state and in your community, in your schools and everywhere else, because um, because this is where we are. And so it's a very challenging situation when that's where we are.
Yeah, it is. I like how you described Tabor, because it's complicated at the very least, right? Like whether you like it or not, I think everyone understands that it's hard to understand. And that right there makes it tough to work with. And then there is the what it means to everyone else and the spin of that and the impact of that. And it made me think about like if if that was my salary, right? And I got $50,000 a year, but then every paycheck my boss is like, but just kidding, I'm gonna take 20% of that back, right? It's just like it's actually illogical in it. It's like how it functions, and I think that's part of why people don't understand it. I think, the people who are supportive of it like it because it lowers their taxes and they get these refunds back. But at the same time, there's all these things that we don't do that you would expect in this vibrant economy that are very, very challenging to us and they impact us every day, right? So the example I'm most familiar with is what it means for schools. And, we're under just under $10,000 per student that we get every year.
Well, and it depends on the district. Keep that in mind
Right.
because
That's
every
right. Yeah,
district gets a different amount based on the characteristics of that district because it
that's right.
actually
The
costs
mills and the
more to
bonds.
educate kids in, like a rural remote district than it does in an urban district, than it does in, a suburban district. And
Yeah.
the
Yes.
the characteristics of the children, how many special education students are you educating, and how many kids from who qualify for free, well, we used to use free lunch as a proxy for economically challenged. That's looks like going to be changing this year too. We've been working on that for a few years. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Good.
there's
Yeah.
but so I'm just saying it's different everywhere in the state.
Yeah. Yes. But even using that as a baseline, right? First off, I don't have that to educate my kids every year, right? Like I can't just write a check for it. And then um, part of why we can do it at all when you look at salaries and buildings and all those other things is because everyone's doing a little bit instead of each parent having to do that personal investment. And that's that collective thing that we've said we wanted to do when we live in community. That is why we have taxes, is because when we all put in a little bit, it adds up. And the on the flip side of that, then we have Tabor that comes in and says, okay, but we're going to give you a couple $100 back. And I love the check. I mean, it's nice, but it's also not enough that it significantly impacts anything in my life. It might be a car payment. It's not my mortgage payment, right? And so when I look at what it does for me personally, it's cute, to be honest. But what it does for us, because we don't have it in the pool, because it's cute for everyone, it means that we can't do things that impact us all. And, we get more out of it. Our return on investment is quite high, which is why we also do this great experiment of collective community funding.
Well, and we also do it though. I mean, it's because education is a public good. And it's not just a public good that benefits the families that are able to take advantage of it, right? So if you have a whole community of people, that whole community benefits when the children in that community have a better education. I mean, education isn't just education, it's also part of your childcare system. It's part of your workforce development, right? If you want to have people who are going to come and work in your communities later, don't you want them to be well educated? Don't you
Mhm.
want them to be turn into taxpayers themselves who are contributing to the overall functioning of our society, right? Does it
Mhm.
help you? Does it help our community when we have people who are living on the streets and don't have housing? Does that make you feel good when you're walking down the street? No. So
Right.
community putting things into a pot and from which we all benefit. And let me just go back to that, example of people who are experiencing homelessness. People who are experiencing homelessness are also much more expensive for us as society as a whole. I mean, I think there's estimates that I've heard $40,000-$50,000 a year because of emergency room visits and other services.
Yep.
This is not where you want your children to end up, right? There was a study years and years ago that people always used to quote about, well, if based on third grade reading levels and your chances of, going to prison if you didn't achieve them, whatever, right? And we're not trying to raise the alarm here, but students who do better in school tend to have better outcomes that are better for society. And so when we all pitch in as a society and say we want our community to be a better place, whether or not you have children in the schools, having educated children in your society is better for everybody overall in the long run.
Totally. I 100% agree, right? There's all these other ways that we pay for things that if we don't pay for it up front. And so and often then we don't have that choice. And we are going, okay, yeah, it might cost this much money to deal with this in our healthcare system or in nonprofits or somewhere else, but we're paying for it somewhere. And most of these things, when you go and do the studies, it's really nice because they do uncover that, one figure I heard is for every dollar you spend on social emotional learning in pre-K and kindergarten saves $15 as a society over the course of that person's life because we're building millions of neurons. That's like the time when our brain is developing the most. So if we are supporting kids in the way that is most impactful for what biologically is happening, then that turns into them having those skills that you talked about in just one dimension, right? But it's a big one of critical thinking and time management and all those things that come from eventually from that. And the what we're dealing with right now is all the people where we didn't make those investments. We're paying for it somewhere else, right? It also costs more costs more to put a person in prison for a year than it does to send them to Stanford. And so,
Yeah.
right, like those are the kinds of things that don't even make sense. But we always pay for some of those programs because we know we must. And yet
Well,
the contract isn't always true.
right. And so, I mean, and take that example that you gave. So if you have a kid with some kind of needs, disability, early interventions,
Hmm?
and not, I mean, they're helpful for all kids, but there are some kids who, if they get early interventions, they fall off of that special needs chart and they don't need the help later on. So you're really saving thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for a kid when you're able to get them those needs early. And fortunately, that's one of the things that we've upped in the last few years in the state of Colorado is
Yeah.
making sure that the the money that we promised for special education dollars, which is probably still not enough, is at least, but the money that we at least said we'd pay years ago, we are finally paying. But the federal government has not kept up, right? The IDEA, the Individuals with Disability, EA, Education Act, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That one, I mean, that was supposed to, the federal government said, no, we are going to mandate that you do things for people who have special needs. And right now they're paying 16 to 17 cents on the dollar, or at least that's what the number was a year or two ago. I might be outdated. They were supposed to be paying up to 40 cents on the dollar. I mean, when that IDEA first came out, that was the original promise, and that has never happened. And so you're
Right.
basically, that's why you have that term unfunded mandate that people throw around, and a lot of people don't understand what it means. It means that the federal government says that we are required to do this. Even the Supreme Court, the old one, that one that I thought had a little more credibility, said that you have to do more for kids with special needs, but we're not going to give you any money to do it. You're going to have to figure that out on your own. And then,
Yeah. Yeah. And what a great example, right? I mean, one of my kids needed an intervention and got it in first or second grade. And we didn't know, right? I mean, how would you? We didn't know what we didn't know. And because we had somebody at the right time with the right skills, I mean, she was weeks. It was the most amazing thing to watch because she really just needed like this really amazing skill set that came in her life. And like you would, it was like it never happened, right? And the same was sort of true with my daughter with reading, although it took a little longer to get that right person at the right time. But that's the beauty of this, and it's also the beauty because that can exist in other places in our society, right? Like we have the ability also to really help people with those things that impact us all, even though they look like they're something that's individual. our accessibility, um, our ability to have transportation and water and all those other things are things that are easy to take for granted because you have them every day. But
Mhm.
it's
Right, perfect
amazing what,
example, transportation. Like, if you have, if you're driving down I-25 and you hit a pothole and it takes out, you know, your your under part of your car or whatever, oh my gosh, how much is that going to cost you as an individual to fix versus if we just kept the roads well maintained so that you didn't have the potholes and they didn't cause damage to everybody's car. I mean, you know,
right?
kind of an obvious example, but
But
there
it's
are things that we should and do invest in society. It's just we have more limited capability here than we do in other places. And of course, other places are, you know, have different challenges, but that's where we are here.
absolutely. I realized that you shared a lot of things that I'm very excited about. And so I'm really grateful that you took the time from all that busy work to do this. We didn't even really get a chance to talk about what's next for you. Obviously, you are quite busy for the next few months, and then you're going to be busy again, really trying to talk to more people about the Senate campaign. And I would love to know more about that. So I'm hoping maybe you can come back when you have some more free time. I'm thinking summer maybe, because I would love to know what you're interested in as you think about moving from the House to the Senate. What would be your new focus or increased focus, so to speak? So yeah,
Well, thank you. No, no,
yeah,
happy to come back. I mean, I think, as you move from one chamber to the other, I mean, you're doing that because you found things that you've cared about to work on, and hopefully you've had success working on them, right?
mhm,
Um, so no, I'm, doing this job is just a real honor and a privilege, right? You're able to to do the work that you feel is important because every legislator gets to choose at least 5 bills that they run. You don't get to choose to have money or anything. You still have to work to make
yeah,
everything happen. But it is just a real honor and privilege because, sometimes you make a difference in somebody's life and you're going, wow, that's really a cool thing that we were able to make this great difference in somebody's life. And, that was my bill that did that, right? So it's a really cool thing. And I don't know that you necessarily need to change focus, but we have about twice as many members of the House as we do in the Senate.
mhm,
So there's sort of a responsibility if you're in the Senate to and bills have to have sponsors from both the House and the Senate in order to get through the legislature. So there is a responsibility to take on more pieces of legislation. So,
mhm. A little
there's
bit
just,
broader view, so to speak. I mean, you
well,
have to look at it
maybe
all in the House, but
there's a lot of, I'd say different people in the legislature have different areas of expertise. For instance, this year I'm doing a bill on the Colorado Open Records Act, which I haven't really delved into before. So, every year you might pick up new things that you learn in order to, um, you know, you learn new stuff. We're legislators. We're, a mile wide and an inch deep. Occasionally we learn a little bit more here and there because, we need to for the work we do. It's just you continue to do the work and you continue to find things that care about. Somebody said to me last week, it's like, well, you don't really, I mean, is it really, do you actually find, 5 things to fix, in the statutes every year? And it's like, well, yeah, actually, most of us find way more than 5, and we're having to really limit ourselves in order to, get to 5. And they're much more careful about granting additional bills to people because there's only so much capacity of our nonpartisan staff to write our bills and get things through the system. So, um, just look forward to being able to continue doing the work.
I'm so glad. Really grateful for you. I was very excited to get to celebrate you last week with the CASB, the Colorado Association of School Boards Award. Thank you for all the work that you do to still keep, your eye and your heart on this work and keep that through line going. It means a lot, and I am really excited about how that's all, that's just a piece of all the great work you're doing. You really are thinking about things in
Well,
multiple places that are really impactful.
thank you for your work on the school board. I think most people, don't know that you put in hours and hours and hours of work every single week and you don't get paid anything to do it.
Yeah.
And So, being on a school board is, pretty much a labor of love. It's, we've now authorized the legislature that some school boards can pay their members, but most don't. And
Right.
so it's a really important thing. And, I'm a little bit torn on that because you want people to be on the school board for the right reason, but you also don't want to limit the opportunities for those who might not be able to serve without some compensation. So it's a
Yeah,
challenge.
it is. Well,
But thank
thank
you for
you.
your work there.
I appreciate
And it's been a
appreciate that.
particularly challenging thing in recent years.
Yeah, we're hearing from the same people about those things, and I'm grateful for you being a voice of reason down the way to help add protections for people who need it the most. That means a lot. So I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for your time today and all you have going on, and um, I'm just really excited to see what else shakes loose in the next few weeks because you've got some really great work still in the pipeline. So can't wait to talk to you in a couple months. For everybody else who tuned in today, thank you so much. Cathy is running for Senate. So if you are interested in volunteering, getting involved, contributing, there are lots of ways that you can support all the great work that Cathy is doing here locally to make sure that she can keep being our champion. So please do so if you can. And thanks to everyone. I'll see you all next week. Paid for by the Larimer County Democratic Party, 604 South Mason Street, Fort Collins, Colorado, 80524, 970-689-6391. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.